After returning home, I had the nanny stew some soup and took it to the hospital. Sure enough, I bumped into Jeff in the ward. He gave me a cold glance and remained silent. I approached him meekly, tugged at his sleeve. I tried to remember my previous arrogant and weak tone. Ding! Wisnovel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Are you still mad at me? I feel wrong too. You promised me that you wouldn't have any contact with Alexa Lutz again. But when I came to the hospital, she was still there, shouting at me. Who does she think she is? A hint of disgust flashed in Jeff's eyes, but he concealed it well. I've already asked her to leave, he said indifferently. She came that day because she was worried about my mom's health. It won't happen again. It's best this way. Don't forget that I'm your girlfriend, I said. I asked Dylan these days, and he said he would help bring in that expert to perform surgery on your mother. But you'll have to wait. He's been having some issues with a project he wants to invest in recently. Jeff's Adam's apple moved, and he suddenly turned to look at me. What kind of issues? I pretended to struggle to recall. It seems to be related to something in the outskirts of S-City, right? The next whole day, Jeff's attitude towards me suddenly became much warmer. He kept subtly inquiring about whether Dylan knew anything, and I pretended to reconcile with him, finally being taken by him to a dinner with Rupert, August, and others. Before leaving, I felt a bit guilty for no reason, so I called Dylan to inform him, but he had his phone off. After much thought, I felt I couldn't miss such a good opportunity. In a very private room, Rupert August raised his glass to me. Miss Russell, I am interested in investing in Jeff's studio. I'm Rupert August. Maybe in the future, we'll have the chance to collaborate. Thinking of the past, he helped Jeff destroy half of the Wallach family and take over my family's business. I could only endure the nausea and exchange pleasantries with him. After a few rounds of drinks, he casually spoke up. I heard that the Russell family and the Wallach family are old friends. Miss Russell and the current head of the Wallach family, Dylan Wallach, are also engaged? What engagement? It's just the parents from both families talking nonsense. He always makes things difficult for Jeff. I really hate him. I looked at Jeff Gardner. From childhood to now, I've only liked one person, and that's Jeff. If it weren't for Jeff, I wouldn't endure pretending to be nice to him. While saying these words, all I could think of were Jeff Gardner and Rupert August's faces. Perhaps my expression of hatred was too real and intense, as everyone in the room burst into laughter. Miss Russell has a keen eye, seeing through the true colors of Dylan Wallach, this pseudo-gentleman. Rupert August chuckled as he leaned in. So, would you mind telling me, what exactly is he doing in S-City? Feeling dizzy, I stood up. Sorry, feeling unwell in the stomach, I need to go to the restroom. In high heels, feeling a bit lightheaded, I walked to the door of the private room and opened it. A gust of cold wind mixed with a faint lemongrass scent blew over. The familiar handsome face in front of the light laid a thin layer on it. With a start, I suddenly sobered up. Dylan stood expressionless at the door, and upon seeing me, he subtly curled his lips. Carrie, so that's how it is. The corridor lights were a warm yellow, but on Dylan's face, it felt chilling to the bone. He heard it. In the mixed sense, I suddenly pulled out a thread of chaotic thoughts, and in that moment, the rising intoxication dissipated. My fingers trembled as I held the door handle, a sense of unease growing inside, and I subconsciously called out, Dylan, you'd better not call me that way, to avoid disgusting yourself again. With a disappointed and icy gaze, he swept over. Then, beyond my shoulder, his gaze fell on Jeff Gardner and Rupert August behind me. Wondering what I was doing in City, why didn't you dare to ask me directly? He chuckled lightly, his voice gaining a sharp and decisive edge. Do you think planting a few moles in my company can influence my judgment? Your methods are as ridiculous as you are. Already tall, he straightened his body, looking down on the group with an obvious sense of disdain. Clowns. Leaving these words behind, he turned and walked away. In the private room, Jeff looked grim, suddenly flipping over a plate. What is he so proud of? Does he think I only have these few tricks? Someday, I will watch him die in front of me. I wanted to slap him so badly, but thinking of the original plot, I still couldn't let my guard down. I could only force a smile. I'll go back with Dylan first and ask him what he found out. After saying that, I grabbed my bag and left. Chasing all the way downstairs, I saw Dylan getting into the car. Dylan, I gasped for breath, speaking urgently. Listen to me. I came here today to find out what schemes Jeff and the others have against you. Through the half-open car window, I met Dylan's dead calm gaze, and my voice suddenly faltered. He raised his hand, leisurely supporting his chin as if listening to an interesting joke. He even curved his lips slightly, chuckling softly. So, do you still want to say that all this is because you like me, worry about my safety, and fear that I can't handle them alone? The boundless anxiety and panic seemed to foam on the sea surface, all rising from the bottom of my heart. I pinched my palm, forcing myself to focus and explain seriously. Yes, I know you don't believe me, but Jeff is not as simple as you think. If his methods were only what they appeared to be, I wouldn't. Carrie, Dylan suddenly interrupted me. Through the gradually closing car window, I saw his eyes shattered yet still beautiful. You can't rely on my love for you, indulge yourself, and deceive me endlessly. We shouldn't contact each other anymore. After saying that, the car window closed completely, the reflective film cutting off everything. The black Rolls-Royce drove away decisively. I stood alone in place. The slightly cool night breeze blew over, giving me a sudden shiver. In my past life, after I married Jeff Gardner, Dylan had reminded me more than once, saying Jeff was ambitious and warning me to be careful. But no matter what he said, I didn't believe it. I even sneered and mocked him. Aren't you just jealous of Jeff? Jealous that he came from a humble background but now stands in a higher position than you? Full of lies. I won't believe a word you say. At that moment, Dylan stood in front of me, wearing a neatly tailored suit, but his eyes were filled with a completely wounded expression. Coming to my senses, I found myself sitting in the car, instructing the driver to go to the Wallach house. However, Dylan didn't return to the old mansion, nor did he go back to his own home. The car circled through most of the city, finally stopping outside his company building. Looking up, I saw a light still on in the top floor office. Thinking of the sharp resistance on his face before the car window closed, I suddenly felt a bit timid, so I went to the nearby convenience store, bought a can of beer, drank it all in one go to bolster my courage. As the drunkenness gradually resurfaced, I walked into the elevator and pressed the button. Dylan's office is located on the 39th floor, with a high level of privacy, but he never guards against me. When I pushed open the door, the spacious office was empty. In the adjacent closed lounge, the sound of water could be faintly heard. Other than that, there was only a faint scent of lemongrass, mixed with a hint of mild bloodiness. Bloodiness? My heart tightened, and in an instant, countless plots from past lives flashed through my mind. Without thinking, I pushed open the door to the lounge next to me. Just as I opened the door, the sound of water suddenly stopped in the lounge's restroom. Dylan walked out, wiping his wet hair, but the moment his gaze met mine, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Carrie? My gaze uncontrollably fell on him. I've always known that Dylan is very handsome, but most of the time, he always wears that cold expression, making him seem distant. However, at this moment, because of the mist, the originally stern contours of his eyebrows and eyes softened slightly. The water droplets falling from his hair tips followed the smooth muscle lines all the way down, disappearing at the edge of the towel around his waist. The cold white skin usually covered by suit fabric was now fully exposed, a small mole on his waist shining with allure. In addition, his left forearm was wrapped in several layers of gauze, already soaked with water, faintly revealing some redness of blood. Indeed, he was injured. Get out. Perhaps my intense gaze was too obvious. Dylan closed his eyes and coldly rebuked, but his tone lacked intimidation. Whether it was alcohol or instinct that drove me, I blinked. Instead of leaving, I took a few steps inside, closing the door behind me. "Yuri injured," I said, walking towards him step by step. "Dylan, what happened? Moreover, your wound is bleeding again and needs to be rebandaged." "It's just a minor injury," Dylan said indifferently. "I'll take care of it myself. It's none of your business." He paused. "Miss Russell, you shouldn't be in my office right now. After all, your boyfriend." I wrapped my arms around his neck, planted a drunken kiss on his lips, silencing the rest of his words. "Don't speak. Nothing you say is what I want to hear." I mumbled somewhat incoherently. In the entanglement, the temperature of our lips gradually rose. In a disordered manner, we both fell onto the nearby bed. Even the bath towel was pulled apart in the process. As this long and deep kiss ended, I leaned on Dylan's shoulder, panting continuously. I saw a surge of dark desire in his eyes. He still struggled to speak. Is it for him again this time? Of course it's for myself. Alcohol and kissing made my brain a mess, and some words slipped out without much thought. I assented normal to have some indescribable thoughts when seeing my fiancé after a shower. My fingertips touched the water droplets, intentionally or unintentionally playing with the snow-white skin, 2 points of misty blush. I was satisfied to see Dylan's Adam's apple roll violently twice, then he grabbed my hand. And besides, since I was 18, I've been thinking about this. "I want to be with you, Dylan, only you." A moment of silence filled the air. Then everything changed. The whole world seemed to be in chaos, with only the two of us left. The remaining water droplets quickly evaporated due to the high body temperature. The light fixture on the swaying ceiling, like me, seemed to be a small boat thrown into a stormy sea, swaying violently. Soon, only the panting breaths were left. Inexplicably, I thought of when I was 18. I remembered the night after the college entrance exam when I got drunk, hiding on the balcony to secretly kiss Dylan. No matter how I flirted and tempted, he only agreed to kiss me. "Carrie, you're still young," he whispered in my ear, his warm body temperature still patient. "I will give you a chance to change your mind. Now, Dylan." I only managed to say one word before my own hoarse voice startled me. Dylan paused, lowered his eyes slightly, looking down at me. The intense emotions in his eyes surged up and then dissipated instantly. After a moment, he raised his hand and covered my eyes. "There's no second chance to change your mind, Carrie." Outside the glass window, the heavy rain poured down at some point. Inside the lounge, the humid heat rose along with the light. Dylan pressed on the most sensitive part of my waist. His voice low and hoarse, sometimes light, sometimes heavy. "Carrie, don't hide. Just feel me well." I thought about the wound on his arm, feeling a bit worried and wanting to sit up to check. But the sudden increase in force made me swallow back all my words. "I told you, it's just a minor injury." Dylan's slender fingers twirled a strand of my sweaty hair. His usually cold eyes seemed to crack open a gap, revealing buried emotions deep inside. inside. There's still time, Carrie, don't be so nervous. The fresh scent of lemongrass gradually mixed with my own scent, along with the smell of alcohol. In a certain moment, they blended and overflowed. At 4 in the morning, dragging my weak body on the carpet, I could hardly stand steady. Dylan hooked my waist with his uninjured arm and pulled me back. You should rest, Carrie. I tried hard to look back at him. But your wound really needs to be rebandaged. Also, how did you get injured in the first place? Dylan suddenly fell silent. In the suffocating silence, I suddenly realized something. You don't think I'm trying to find out about you for Jeff, do you? He stared straight at me, obviously confirming it. I felt a little sad and a little angry. We've done this kind of thing before. I told you, I was afraid you might be in danger, so I went to Jeff to inquire about their plans to deal with you. Why won't you believe me? I've trusted you. Dylan's voice was very soft. I've trusted you many times in these 2 years, Carrie. My throat suddenly felt like it was being blocked by something. I blinked my slightly sour eyes and heard him continue. But whether I believe you or not is no longer important. From now on, no matter how sweet your words are, I won't let you go again. As for that Jeff Gardner, he's not as simple as you think. I blurted out, seeing Dylan furrow his brows slightly, and couldn't help but take a deep breath. If I say, in my past life, I died at his hands, would you believe me? Rain was tapping against the window. The darkness shrouded any hint of moonlight. In the dim light indoors, Dylan sitting across from me seemed to have frozen in place. Past life? Dylan, have you ever thought that we are actually characters in a book? After hesitating for a moment, considering the terrifying power of the original plot, I decided to tell Dylan everything. I don't know if it was a dream or a real past life. Anyway, in the previous life, from the moment Jeff appeared, it was as if I could only see him in my eyes. By the time I finished narrating those 10 years from the past life, the rain outside had already stopped. A faint golden light was spreading across the horizon. The final project, it cost my parents their lives and allowed Jeff to successfully take over all of my family's assets. He said he hated me because for 10 years by my side, he endured unimaginable humiliation. After that, he used the excuse that I suffered too much and went insane to send me to a mental hospital. As I spoke, I suddenly felt a lump in my throat. Even though so much time had passed, everything had started anew. The half year in the mental hospital still felt like a nightmare to me. I was bound hand and foot every day, forced to take excessive doses of medication. My mind was foggy, with hardly any moments of clarity. I also had to endure the excruciating pain of regular electric shocks. So later, after finally regaining consciousness, I escaped from the ward and jumped off the hospital's rooftop. With a slight tremor in my voice, I was engulfed in Dylan's sudden embrace and warmth. His hand ran through my hair, pressing my head against his chest. That was just a dream. I won't let that happen. Yes, you won't. I closed my eyes in his embrace. In front of me, it seemed like the fiery scene from the wedding day was reappearing. So even though in the dream you couldn't overcome the original plot's power and couldn't save me, at the happiest moment of Jeff's life, you sent him to hell. The familiar scent emanating from Dylan and the exhaustion from the sleepless night quickly lulled me to sleep. In the dream, it felt like I was back in the past life. During the 10 years when Dylan and I were at odds, whenever we met in public, I would attack him with the most vicious words and suppress him at all costs. But he still wore the scent of lemongrass perfume. While I was alive, I despised him to the extreme, never caring. It wasn't until I watched him being consumed by flames that I suddenly understood. Because that was Carrie Russell at 18. The Carrie Russell, before meeting Jeff Gardner. The last gift I gave to Dylan Wallach. The first thing I did when I woke up was to take Dylan to the hospital to redress his wound. The wound must not get wet, and this arm should not be exerted for 7 days. The doctor solemnly instructed, "You can leave now." Sitting in the car, I turned to Dylan. "Can you tell me now how you got injured?" In the dimly lit car, he gazed into my eyes and sighed softly. "It was just a little accident while I was inspecting the project site." I suddenly bit my lip. "Is it related to Jeff Gardner?" Dylan's warm fingertips came over, separating my teeth and lips, soothingly rubbing my lips. "Don't worry. The only way he can hurt me is through you. So, you just need to stay away from him and leave the rest to me." "But I don't want that." I grabbed his fingers with a hint of teasing and said seriously, "Dylan, I have died once. In a sense, I am older than you now. Whatever you decide to do, how you deal with Jeff, let me know, okay?" After a moment of silence, he quietly agreed. "Okay, Carrie, I won't interfere with your decision, but you should try to stay away from Jeff Gardner as much as possible." I nodded, suddenly wanting to tease him. "Are you afraid I'll be charmed by Jeff again?" Dylan nodded calmly. Behind the lowered eyelashes, a hint of poorly concealed vulnerability flashed. He was afraid. It turns out that Dylan, who gradually took over the Wallach family at the age of 16 and was rumored to be decisive, also felt fear. I cupped Dylan's face and said earnestly, "Dylan, we have known each other since the day I was born. When I was sickly as a child and stayed in the hospital, you came every day with a bouquet of flowers and comic books to see me. When I was 14 and had my first period, you went to buy sanitary napkins for me. After secretly kissing at 18, I have been dreaming about you all this time. Without any brainwashing of the original plot, I wouldn't even glance at Jeff Gardner. I have always loved you, only you. This sentence was like suddenly opening Pandora's box. The window was closed, and in the well-insulated space, Dylan suddenly reached behind my head, kissed me forcefully. This kiss was so intense, the lips tingled with a slight pain, even the tip of the tongue went numb from the sucking. I felt weak, yet burning hot, sitting on his lap, sliding down uncontrollably, until his neatly ironed suit shirt was crumpled into a ball. I suddenly remembered the doctor's advice. Wait, you shouldn't exert yourself with your wound. Dylan pulled me back with his uninjured hand, sitting me upright on his lap. Because of my force, the muscles of his thigh wrapped in well-fitted pants were tense and hot to the touch. I swayed, subconsciously holding onto his leg. Dylan let out a soft groan, his voice hoarse. It felt like there was a blazing fire in front of his fingertips. My sanity was instantly burned to ashes. As my hand moved inch by inch, at the moment it touched the fire, I heard Dylan's voice, husky with restrained desire, in my ear. I'll leave it to you, Carrie. Show me what dreams you've had about me. After that day, Jeff Gardner did not contact me for a long time. I inquired at the hospital and found out that he, through some connections, had already invited another tumor specialist to help his mother with the surgery. This is probably his male lead, Halo. As graduation approached, I decided to start interning at the family's company early. Because the Russell family had long maintained cooperation with the Wallach family, I had more opportunities to interact with Dylan. I planned to visit Jeff's studio later. I sat across from Dylan, took a bite of my bagel, and spoke up. According to the previous life's timeline, by this time, you and I would have already fallen out, and I would have started using the family's resources to help Jeff expand his network, even taking away a very important project from you. Dylan suddenly looked up at me. Emotions were undisguised beneath his long eyelashes. I quickly added, I just want to see how far his current plan has progressed. Wait for me at home for dinner tonight. Jeff's studio was not far from the city center. With his initial connections, if it weren't for my wholehearted assistance, he wouldn't have been able to afford this place at all. When I entered, I saw Alexis sitting at his desk. Jeff stood behind her, leaning down in a very ambiguous posture, almost enveloping her in his arms. It was the same in the previous life. I had long noticed countless abnormal ambiguities between him and Alexa, but Jeff always refused to admit it. I had many arguments with him about this, each one escalating into a huge fight. When I was on the verge of hysteria and almost going crazy, Jeff just stood aside, looking at me with a bored look. Later, all these became evidence of me oppressing and humiliating him.